all of the ways that the person got away with murder or concealed a crime were underlined. Come on. I have read hundreds of true crime books. Hundreds. I've never done that. Never done that. Very interesting case, very complex perpetrator you have here. I do believe that there was premeditation. I don't think he thought he was going to do it that day. And then he said, okay, now this is what I got to do. And he set about to do it. And he knew what he was going to do.
You better be watching. You better be watching in the dark. You better be watching.
Mr. Pearson invited me into the house, and I thought for a second, knowing what I know now, I could have been the fourth bag under the house.
I was the main witness. I had to tell them about everything that I found, and that I felt that they were under the house. And stared me down, and I just looked right back at him.
I'm Sonya Paz.
And I'm Mark Kospchik.
And we are your host of Investigated.
This podcast describes scenes of true crime details and may not be suitable for all listeners. Please be advised.
Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 12 of Investigated. Mark and I are so excited that you are here once again. How you doing today, Mark?
I am excited. I am well, and I hope you're well, and I can't wait to play this next episode with your discussion with Esther. It was amazing, and I know I say that word a lot, but it was actually amazing.
It was. She is just a pro. She's a top-notch pro. She's sharp as a tack, and I just love talking to her. Our recording was well over the time that we had recorded for the interview, but hey, we got to chat it up and get this true crime podcast stuff yammered about. So it was great. It was great.
It was. And it actually, you say interview, and that's what I thought it was going to be when I listened to it. But it was more of an in-depth discussion and wrap up of Pearson and her take, being an amazing podcaster herself in true crime, and her take on it. And it was refreshing to listen to her and you discuss it. And I can't wait for the listeners to hear it.
I know, me too. She is the founder of Once Upon a Crime. It turned out to start out as a passion project, which you will hear in our discussion, but we go into a lot of other things as well. But before we do get that interview started, I wanted to address, we had gotten some comments and some questions, and some of the questions are things that I have been wanting to talk about as well. So the timing is always great. I received a message on Instagram from Renee. She had asked, Sonya, have you considered writing a book? And the answer is yes. Haven't we, Mark?
Let's write a book and go on Netflix. That's the goal.
That is the goal. That would be really amazing. You know, hey, Netflix, Amazon Prime, Apple TV.
Yeah, we're not
Hulu.
Discriminatory. No way.
No,
we'll take anybody.
Hey.
Three-part series. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah, we're looking for that, whatever. I got the arsenal. I got the notes. I got the articles. I got the know-how. I got the memories. So, hit us up.
And we got the whole podcast, man. We're 12 episodes heading into 13.
Yep. So we got a lot of things, a lot of great content regarding this really abstract story. She goes on to say, you have a lot of material and being able to be picked up in a story or book would be compelling, which I totally agree. And she says, considering basically the psyche of this guy, have you looked at anything prior to his first marriage? It seems once a psychopath, kind of always a psychopath. I think you and I both agree that there is a close to 20-year gap that we have not been able to fill. I personally believe because he was in the Coast Guard, he didn't do probably a lot of shenanigans before he went into the Coast Guard. And after he got out, I think he was just trying to, start his life off. and probably didn't do a whole lot of damage. I have some articles of when he was an insurance salesman, and I could cover that later because that accompanies an ad that we had found where he was trying to really start his life off with being an insurance salesman in his younger years in a career type of job. And then I think he had just met Pauline. But the questions always run through my mind. What did they do for fun before they had kids? We know where they got married. They got married in Pendleton, Oregon in 1947. They probably had the love for golf, and there's probably a lot of things. I don't know if they traveled. I don't know if they just kept close to home. It's always a really interesting thing to be able to connect with that. And I was going to mention this a little later, but since we're on the topic of the Salem and this whole Pendleton area, is I know that I had mentioned in my interview and chat with Clark that I had reached out to Jonel's son, who was James, his uncle, and of course the cousins to Marianne and Paula. And he had said that he really didn't recollect anything. But aside from that, I had found Jonel's granddaughter, and I had reached out to her because this was one of Jonel's daughters. So obviously Jonel's granddaughter. And I asked her, I said, I'm writing the story and your name came across as one of the people I could probably get some information from if she could help me fill in some blanks. And she just wrote back and said, I really don't know much about that side of our family. And I said, sure thing, no problem. Left my name and my email and that kind of thing. I never heard anything back. So it just kind of leads me to believe that Jonel just really didn't want anything to do with what had happened. Maybe she just divorced that section of her family off, or maybe didn't even communicate to her own children that, their uncle was this crazy person.
Could have been. They could have wrote him off when they found out what happened, or maybe they didn't have a great relationship to start with.
Right. And as we know, Clark had mentioned that twins' relationship are typically, it's very close. It's a very unusual type of relationship that unless you're a twin, you really don't understand. But it's kind of hard because you don't know, is blood really thicker than water in this case? Or is what he did it trumps that whole methodology?
Correct. You're either close or you're not. There's no in the middle when it comes to twins, it seems.
Right. So I wanted to mention that since we were on that topic. And then she had also said, was Jacqueline convicted of kidnapping? And from what we've researched, we do not think so, especially since Pearson was able to communicate with her through jail and through prison. So he was in contact with her. So I don't believe that she was ever charged with anything, although that is what they started to look for her for. But I don't think that ended up playing out as it probably should have.
Yeah, that whole thing was a little bit of a quagmire too, that for so long the family looked for him and didn't have any kind of communication until years later.
Yeah. So many thanks to Renee. She said, thank you. Keep up the great episodes. I'm also excited for what cases come next. So thank you. That's awesome.
Yeah, that is.
She reached out to us on Instagram, but then I also got an email through the website. She wanted to make sure that I got at least one of those communications.
Perfect.
And then speaking of Instagram, Shannon, who's been a follower on Instagram, has been reposting our videos, when I do the little video sound bites that are 30 seconds long. And then I also get our social media handled by way of just a little quote from the episode. And all of those you can find on our Instagram and Facebook. So she's shared that. And then we have a question from Elaine. She was really interested in the whole Salem thing. And one of her things was, were we able to find any childhood friends that would remember James and Jonel? And my thing is that although this is 2024, they were born in 1925, they would be 99 this year. So anybody that would have remembered them as small children probably were not really alive at this point anymore. They probably
Right.
have passed away.
Yeah.
But, even if somebody had remembered them and were childhood friends of them, that's kind of hiking up there in the age bracket. But we're always asking anybody, if you are from the Salem area or the Pendleton area, Santa Clara, Biloxi, Cedar City, even the New Jersey area, to where Jacqueline and her daughter and the rest of her family went after the whole Biloxi thing, after the whole apprehension of Pearson. Anybody who might have a little snippet or tidbit, investigatedpod.com, definitely reach out to us because we want to hear from you.
We do. We want to hear any little tidbit that may lead to something else.
And with that said, it would be really great to hear from the actual child that ID'd Pearson from the FBI photo. I think that would be pretty remarkable. So anyone out there in the Biloxi area or surrounding areas who remembers this happening, oh my goodness, we would really love to hear from you. So definitely connect with us through the contact form on our website. Thank you to Shannon, to Renee, to Elaine, and we do have more shout outs to Lori and Sue. Lori had messaged me. She's a friend of mine, said, I really loved this past interview. Clark was amazing. So yay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
We have been told by numerous people that the way that we have presented this story to everyone has been really informative. We have covered things that nobody ever thought that we would cover or even knew information about. But what really adds to this are the interviews that we've had with all of the key players. We are here presenting the facts, but we do bring in people that have been affected by the story. And I think that really helps round out the story, gives it a lot of texture, adds a lot of facets, and viewable from all different angles. And when we interview someone, we want to sound like we're sitting around a table having a conversation, and we want our listeners to feel that same way. We are very honored to have Esther on the show, so without any further ado, let's get on to this interview. So we have the honor of having Esther of Once Upon a Crime here on the Investigated podcast that I happened to meet almost 10 years ago at a podcast meetup in San Jose, and we clicked right away, and I'm really happy to have her on the show today. How you doing today, Esther?
Doing great. Was it 10 years already? My gosh, that's crazy.
Almost, yeah.
That is nuts. Yeah, because I am going on, year 8 of the podcast of Once Upon a Crime.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It was when meetups were really a hot thing, and there was a podcaster meetup that came along, and I joined, and then we went around the table, and this was at your office in San Jose.
Yeah.
And I had said what I was doing at the time, and you had said you were going to be doing true crime. I'm like, I am all over this.
Yeah, it was at my office. I was kind of a baby podcaster. I had actually started podcasting around 2012, but I just did a little kind of hobby podcast where I did a few episodes. It wasn't true crime, and just to learn how to do it. And then I thought I really liked this format, and if I was going to do it like for real, like for a long time, what would I do? And I thought I would love to talk about true crime stories, but because I've been following true crime since I was a teenager, and I thought, nah, nobody's going to want to listen to that. That's so like dark, right? So yeah, but
it's great.
Yeah, that's who knew it was going to become such a thing, right? Nobody knew that. So that's why I started the podcaster group, because I thought maybe we could all learn from each other. Maybe we could all inspire each other or motivate each other to get this going, get these projects done. And it was really cool. So I got to meet you there and some other people that I still know, and once in a while get to maybe see them on Facebook or something. So it was great.
It was pretty cool because shortly after that, there was podcast movement in Southern California, and you had attended, and a few other people that we knew had attended. And that was my first podcast convention per se. But you had catapulted so much from that. And I would love you to tell the listeners on what you do and your podcast and the stories that you tell.
Yeah. So what do I do now? So I basically just tell true crime stories. I've been was a big reader as a kid and as a teen, as a young adult, all my life basically. And when I got into my high school years, I started finding true crime books. And the very first one that I remember getting really hooked on was The Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule, which was about Ted Bundy. And what I liked about it was like the True Detective magazines and things like that back in the day, but it was basically just like kind of like a glorified depiction of violence in a story form. And I wasn't really into that. But what I liked about this book that I had picked up was that she really went into kind of almost like backgrounds and things of the victims and the perpetrators and psychology and motivations, especially like the perpetrators getting into their heads a little bit or trying to figure out why these things happen. And that really, lured me in big time. So much so that I did a college degree in psychology, but my emphasis was in criminal psychology. It was kind of the start of it. The true crime thing was just a hobby. I actually ended up becoming a counselor working with kids in the juvenile justice system, kids who were incarcerated. And so I was counseling them and their parents and kind of looking at motivations. Why do kids get drawn into doing criminal activities, maybe gang affiliation, crime, stuff like that, and trying to get them young and maybe being able to change a mindset or help them to not make that like a criminal career and be their whole life or to be incarcerated. Because once we know that recidivism rates are so big when somebody gets incarcerated young that they tend to have a hard time getting out of that cycle. So that's what I was trying to do as a counselor.
That's some pretty heavy stuff there.
Yeah. So I worked in juvenile hall. I was doing my master's in the counseling program at Santa Clara University, Santa Clara, which your podcast is centered in that town here in our Bay Area where we live. And I wanted to be a counselor, like a therapist counselor. My training was in therapy. But going into juvenile hall, what they call a counselor is really like a correctional officer. So I didn't want to be that. Because I figured we know like kids, they're not going to talk to the correctional officers. These are the people that incarcerate you, right? So I actually went in while I was doing my degree at Santa Clara, working part-time. I went as a teacher at juvenile hall. I actually was teaching the kids every day. But you're locked in with them. So you basically live with them. I mean, during the day, I get to go home at night, thank God. But, but you're there with them. And so you get to know them. And of course, they talk to you and you kind of try to steer them, you try to mentor them as well as teach them. And so that was the whole idea, is me kind of really getting the gist of what goes on with these kids. What are the real problems? What are the real issues? And then when I finish my degree and go counsel these families, I'll have some inside information on what I need to be paying attention to, what I need to be assessing, the skills and the challenges, both that I'm going to be working with when I work with these kids and their families. So that was the idea. Yeah. Like you said, it was heavy. So my little getaway was true crime. That was my
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So I thought, okay, well, let's just do this true crime podcast thing for fun. That's really what it was. I thought, I'll have a few listeners, maybe if I'm lucky. Might have a couple hundred listeners. That'd be great. Whatever. But I never expected it to be a full-time thing. I never expected to make money off it. I never expected to have an audience. I never expected to end up on true crime television and all kinds of other things. Never. So it's been a wild ride, Sonya, really.
And that's one of the things, is that when I've been listening, and I think I was one of your first listeners, and I was so excited and so proud of you and have been on that journey with you, because seeing everything and we're listening to everything as it's unfolded, being part of your groups on Facebook and seeing that you've been on TV and different interviews, and you have been such an inspiration. And then when I decided that I was going to do this story, I remember just reaching out to you and saying, I know that I had talked to you about maybe doing this Pearson story, but it's such a gigantic animal. I think I'm going to try to pursue and do it myself. And you were like, go for it.
Yeah.
So
for sure. Because here's the thing, the way that I look at what I do, and maybe this is the same for you. Yours is a little bit more personal because you have a personal experience or a connection to the victims. But for me, of course it is personal because it's somebody's story. It's a real story, the worst thing that ever happened to these people. But also the way I look at it too is that I'm telling a story. And for me, whenever you're telling a story and it means anything to you, you should put it out there with some passion. And because you are so connected to the story, that, of course, you would do a much better job than I ever would because you have this personal connection, you have this passion for it, and it comes through in the podcast, which is what people want to listen to. They want to hear that they get drawn in because of that. It makes it so much more interesting when we can feel that you really have a passion for the story. So I'm like, yeah, you do it, man. You do a much better job than I would because of that, because I don't have that. I didn't know these people and you did. And to me, that's amazing. I think I would have a very hard time actually covering stories that I knew people personally. I just feel like that's a whole different animal.
Yeah, it definitely is a different animal. And I wasn't sure how I would be able to handle going over a lot of the details, because if you know from talking in one of the earlier episodes, I had talked to the Radvin family, which is Pauline's nephew. And I know the listeners have heard me say this 100 times, but he told me, if you're going to tell the story, you need to tell everything, because what this man did to his family, to his aunt and his cousins, was just horrific.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
And do go over a lot of really awful details. And I do have my moments. And
that's always the difficult part. I think people need to know about this, covering something like this, is you are always making those judgment calls of what to put in and what to exclude. And it sounds like you are. I mean, I can tell that you are by listening to the podcast, that you are very mindful of that, about how you present information, because you're right. That's exactly right. It's like you cannot skimp on the details, because this is reality. And this is about a real story, what really happened to these people. And you can't just gloss over them. But you don't want to glorify the violence, or you don't want to glamorize it. You know what I mean? You want to be respectful of the victims, which you are. And that's right there. To me, it's an art, because there's a lot of true crime podcasts out there. And believe me, a lot of people will start listening to a few minutes and say, no, I can't handle that. This is too much of this, or that's too much of that. Or you watch something, or you listen to something and you're like, I don't feel good listening to this, or I don't feel good watching this. Something about it is just to me. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
That's the thing. So yeah. So no, you're doing it. You and your co-host Mark are doing a fabulous job on this. We're getting the details, but it's also very respectful of the victims, of course, because like I said, you are connected to this family.
Yeah. And I'm finding that speaking with a lot of people that remember them from the Bay Area, and recently talking with somebody from Salem area who grew up with them, she happened to just do a search on James Arthur Pearson, as she does every few months, and the podcast popped up, and she shared with me about how listening to the story and really what had happened, because she didn't know, has really brought her a lot of healing. And that is not the first time I heard it. So I'm really happy to know that there's something that is affecting people in a really genuine and closure style of healing way. That makes sense.
Yes, no, it totally does.
Because I'm completely in love with your podcast, Once Upon a Crime. Tell us the stories that you cover and all that good stuff.
Okay. So Once Upon a Crime, I launched it in 2016. There's already over 300 episodes. And the way that I started the show was just telling true crime stories that I had heard about and really fascinated me, and wanting to dig into a little bit of kind of like motivation, more about like I said, I'm the criminal psychology background, looking into telling the story, because first and foremost, I will always say that I'm a storyteller. So telling the story, but also throwing in there some of the psychology, like the background of the perpetrator and the victim, and then maybe kind of pulling a couple of things out of there to say, okay, well, this looks like maybe how these people connected. This person was able to do this because of this kind of mindset that they had growing up, or this experience they had. So I did that. And the way that I cover episodes, I do a different case every week. So it's a weekly podcast. Once in a while, I'll have a 2 or 3-parter, but that's not the norm. It's usually one case from beginning to the end. So this is the reason why I don't do unsolved cases. I don't do investigations that are in process, because I want to be able to tell the story from the beginning to the end. And so I pick cases usually that are older, that have already been resolved, that we know the outcome. And then I tell the beginning, middle, and end, because I like to finish a book and know what happens at the end. That's just me. So that's the way that I tell it, because like I said, I'm a reader. And every month I pick a different topic. And I try to find cases that fit within a topic. And I think in titles. So I kind of come up with a title and then I think, okay, well, what would fit into that? Because I might have an idea for one case and then fit other cases around it that are kind of similar in some way. So like, for example, my very first series, I call them series, every month is a different series. My very first series was called Lost and Found. And it was about people who were kidnapped and were found, but years later, right? So the 3 that I did in there was the J.C. Dugard, which is here in South Lake Tahoe back in late 70s, early 80s. J.C. Lee Dugard, abducted at age 11, wasn't found until she was 25, I believe, and may have that number a little bit wrong. The Cleveland kidnapping, the 3 women that were held prisoner in a home in Cleveland for a decade.
Right.
And Elizabeth Smart, the girl from Utah who was kidnapped out of her home, out of her bedroom, and taken by this weird dude and his wife.
Maniac, crazy
I
guy.
think, was she gone 2 years? That one I can't remember exactly how long, or months. He was a very strange dude. So that's one example of the way I put together a series, but each one of those cases is separate, but it fits within that topic. It changes every month, and I do separate cases to fit into those topics.
And you cover them so well, and you were so great at storytelling, because I think I told you a while back is that whenever my husband and I are on a road trip or something, he says, let's listen to Once Upon a Crime, because he likes that you just get right to it. You offer in the facts, not a lot of fluff. We don't hear for 20 minutes about what you had for lunch the day before, that kind of thing.
No, that's the thing too. It's so funny because when I was in college for so many years and I went to graduate school and all of that, I couldn't wait until I was done with college. I'm like, no more papers. I never have to write another paper again. And then I get into this podcast. I write a paper every single week because I actually write it. So I do the research, I make an outline, I write a script, and then I record it. So there isn't any fluff. There is no discussions. There's no it's me basically telling the story. If you sit down and listen to somebody tell you a story, that's it. And it's way more work than I should have put myself for. But it's too late now.
It's paid off though, so that's great.
It's too late to change it now. Damn, I should have had a co-host. I should.
But you and your sister, Lorena, you two have gotten together and you've done projects.
Yeah. So here's a couple. People get these mixed up. Lorena, everybody thinks is so funny. The guys from Generation Y, which is another podcast. I mean, they're like in the stratosphere of true crime podcasts, but these guys are my friends and they still get it mixed up. They think Lorena's my daughter, my sister, my cousin. Lorena's my assistant. I met her about 2 years or so after I started the podcast and she started working for me. But yeah, we've done stuff together. We've done some discussions. Now my sister, we all sound the same. So please, everybody gets it wrong. We all sound to have the same voice.
I'm sorry. I got all mixed up.
I know. My sister Yolanda has been on my show and she's like one of my most popular. Yolanda. Yeah. She's one of my most popular co-hosts. Every once in a while, we'll do a discussion on something that we really got into. Like we did the Scott Peterson case together, just discussing it and whatever, because of course it was again here in Northern California. It's one of those cases that we all followed in the news. And she lived actually not too far from where he lived in Modesto. So once in a while, I'd say, we just need to get on and talk about this because we have so much to say. And then we would do it and it would just be really fun and people liked it. So yeah, I've got to get her back on again. She was really fun. But yeah, Loretta and I do once in a while, I'll drag her on to help me.
Oh, awesome. So you have had your share of reporting on all different kinds of crazies. I mean, murderers and kidnappers and people who have sexual assault and everything. What do you think of James Arthur Pearson? This guy, just when you think the story has come to a conclusion or that the murders were the only thing, he keeps going. And then when you think that's done, he keeps going.
Yeah.
What do you think of this guy?
So this is weird because he is such a complex perpetrator. And so I can see why you have so much to talk about in your podcast so first of all, what I have to say is the first thing that leapt out to me when I started hearing about what he did and was the case of John List. Do you know the case about John List?
Yes, I do remember that case because That was in the late 80s, and I was living in New Jersey at the time in a small town called Cranford, which was right next to Westfield, where that whole incident happened.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you you need to do a podcast on that one next, because it really does remind me of that. Because first of all, John List, for those who don't know, he was a family annihilator. What we call a family annihilator is what James Arthur Pearson is. He's a family annihilator. It's usually the male in the family, the father usually, who goes in and kills his entire family, and then goes on to either live another life, or sometimes they just to get caught or whatever, but they basically wipe out their entire family. That's what a family annihilator is. John List was one, and he did this thing where he, one by one, killed the family, including his mother. And then, which we're going to talk about because of the mother thing that you have going on in this podcast too, is so he killed everybody in the family. He also had the financial issues going on like Pearson did. But then he kills the family. He conceals the bodies in the house. Same thing, but not underground. Tells everybody a story about that they're gone, where they went, and blah, 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 just like Pearson did. But then he takes off. And he's in the wind. He's gone. And he does not get found for another 17 years, I believe it was, where he finally got, and it was somebody who happened to say, wait a minute, that looks like our neighbor. Same kind of like thing that you have going on. And it's weird. It's really weird. Okay.
Yeah.
So then he gets sent back and whatever, they find out who he is and all this kind of stuff. And then he has to face trial and everything else. So that reminds me of John List, of that case. And also John List was the very first case on the very first episode of not Unsolved Mysteries. What's the one with
Was it America's Most Wanted?
America's Most Wanted. Yes. Very first episode was John List episode. Yeah. So, I mean, isn't it so weird how so many parallels, family annihilators, they have a certain MO. They also have a certain, I think, psychological background, which is what we're talking about here. Like, what is going on? I have one question for you before I give you any more information on what I think.
Sure.
How long was he and Pauline, how long were they married?
He was married in 1947, so that would have been a total of 22 years.
22, yeah.
Yeah.
I figured he had to have married quite a while because he had an 18-year-old daughter, was the oldest daughter, right? Was Paula, right?
Yes.
So I thought, okay, this is not, I mean, I don't understand this psychology. It's so bizarre that these men marry, they start these families, they provide for them, they have history with them, they're there when they're babies, all the way up till, in Paula's case, a young adult. And then you can still murder them and walk away like nothing happened. And so that to me is like, that's a different psychology there. And him 22 years, John List, I forget how many years he was married, but he had like 4 or 5 kids. So,
right.
But here's the other thing that you said that you pulled out was that Pearson was a person who lived above his means, correct?
Yes, he wanted to give the airs of doing well and being fancy and above the middle class type thing.
Like upwardly mobile kind of guy or whatever, right? Yeah, same thing with John List. Overspent. He bought a huge mansion. And meanwhile, the mansion was almost empty because he had no money for furniture. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. There was telltale signs that this guy was not doing as well as he pretended to. This is the thing I was thinking about Pearson. They were renting that house, correct? They didn't own that house.
Correct. They rented the house that was next door to us on Woodhams. Then they moved a mile away to the Claremont Avenue house, and they also rented that. Mm-hmm. We don't believe, up until he lived in Biloxi, Mississippi, that he actually owned any type of property.
Right. Yeah. So here he is, Mr. I've joined a country club, and yet you don't own your own home, and you've been married for 20-something years. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, because I do know that he relocated from another place. But like you said, if he never owned anything, could be some indication that maybe he wasn't very good at investing or didn't know. Because think about it, Sonya, we know what real estate prices are here in this area. I mean, if he would have bought that home back in 1960, whatever, it'd be worth a freaking fortune. You know what I mean? So,
Right.
yeah. And back then, it wasn't as difficult. I mean, housing prices weren't as high. So it makes you wonder, because this is a thing that bothers me. Okay, we'll get to
Tell me.
what he said about when you get to the point, if you guys have been listening to the podcast, you've heard that point already about the letter that he wrote, which, oh my God. Okay. You did a great job of that, because I was like reading it. I heard that in your voice, like oh my God, as you're reading it. And I'm like, I'm feeling the same way, girl. Totally. Like, this guy is too much. So, because he blames everything on his wife. He basically, this is where you know that what he's telling you is not the truth, because he is doing everything he can to deflect, psychology term, doing everything he can to deflect responsibility away from himself, even while he's saying he's responsible. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's perplexing as all heck.
Yeah. But it's not when you know the criminal mindset. This is what they do. Because even the ones that, again, it's not like he did this in the heat of passion, which, if that was ever a defense, throw that out the window. He didn't do it in the heat of passion because of the fact that if he had accidentally lost his temper and accidentally strangled his daughter, or however, because we don't know for sure what he did to her, accidentally strangled her and she died. And then he takes it upon himself to, oh shit, I got to save myself by killing the rest of my family. And then, doing all the things that he did to get away, to save his own hide, right? If he had accidentally done that for whatever, flipped out or whatever like that, there's two ways that it could have gone. Number one is he could have immediately felt remorseful, turned himself in, not killed the rest of the family, right? That would maybe, if somebody flipped out, would be a response that might happen, right? To say, oh, shoot, what the hell? Like, even some people even kill themselves because they can't take that. Oh my God, like, my wife's going to come home and find out our daughter's dead, and they might go jump off a building or drive off a bridge or something. Or the other thing is, if he panicked, said, I got to do something, I got to get rid of witnesses or whatever, and then he does all the things that he did, and then he takes off. This is what I would picture. You've taken off. Now you have time to think about it, okay? And it's going to replay in your mind over and over and over. Not only did you kill in a horrific way your wife and your youngest daughter after the fact to hide your first murder, then you clean up the crime scene, you put them under, that's like you say in the podcast, that's a lot. Like, that was a lot. So he has all of those hours and hours worth of memories of the horrible act that he committed, right? And if he was really remorseful and still got away, but he's thinking about this, I would see somebody who was actually remorseful and had left and whatever, trying new life, would have a terrible life. Become an alcoholic, become a drug addict, become a bum, whatever. Not a successful guy who remarries again and again. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
I'm like,
and comes up with a variety of different excuses to every wife on how they died. Was it an automobile accident? Was it a TT fly bite?
One more bizarre than the next, like you said, right?
Yeah. The more articles I read and things that I dug up, it was comical. And I'm not trying to put any comic on this whole story, but the insanity and delusion that you kind of delve into when you're researching these facts is that you don't know whether to laugh or cry, because it's scary. Mm-hmm. It's scary to think somebody is that off the charts delusional.
Right. Yeah. And I don't think he is delusional. I think that he's very manipulative. He's very self-serving. He's very self-centered. I couldn't diagnose him as a narcissist, because that's something you'd really have to have all of the markers for to know that, which that's one thing too I was wondering about, because I'm wondering if maybe this is something that's coming up, or I don't know. Sometimes you can get it, sometimes you can't. I know that they had him do a psych assessment to see whether he could stand trial or if he was criminally insane or something. That's what they used to call it
Right.
back then. But I would be interesting to know what the report said, that the judge found him competent to stand trial. I just wondered about the psychology, because they will kind of like go into analysis of what they think. Was this guy a narcissist? Was he a sociopath? Was he whatever? So that would be interesting to know. That's the kind of stuff I always kind of dig for on my episodes of Once Upon a Crime, but I can't always find them because they're not always something that you can get.
Yes, there was a psych eval done, but it was not presented to the prosecution.
But yeah, so this is what I'm saying. If he really was so remorseful and had gotten away with this, same thing with John List, started over a whole new life.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the weird thing. They always go to what they know. You know what I mean? So him, it was like a sales thing or whatever. So that's when they're looking for them. Like FBI is looking for these people, actively looking for them. They will, like you said, put things out to say, hey, this is probably what he might be doing for a living. This is where he might be living near a lake because he's always lived near a lake or whatever. They go for what they know. That's what they do. But John List did the same thing. And he first just started out like a fry cook, and then over the years, and then he got into bookkeeping because that's what he used to do, probably for a restaurant he was working for. And so that was going to make him the most money or whatever. But yeah, so they go for that. But same John List as well, went, changed his name, got a new profession, did well, lived in, his own house, got married. I don't think he had any of the kids, and lives a successful life. I mean, Pearson in his letter tells you how great his life is with his stinking Garden of Eden. I mean,
I don't know how many times, I shouldn't say this online, but we had to re-record that part probably 3 or 4 times because I couldn't stop laughing. And because Mark, my co-host, kept egging me on, and it should be a blooper reel because it was just the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, the Garden of Eden.
And that's all he cares about.
And that's the thing. You said something about you don't mean to laugh at whatever. But the thing is, when I'm sarcastic, once in a while, I'll throw that in because I cannot help myself. But it's always about the perpetrator because they come up with some things that are so ludicrous sometimes. And the reason why they do that, they're defensive or whatever, or something that you're like, why are you paying attention to the damn garden with what kind of tree was that? Because it kept the gum tree. What was it?
Oh, yeah, the gumball tree.
Gumball tree. Okay. I've never heard
of and don't forget the apple trees where apple trees just don't grow.
Yeah. And so this is, and it's that kind of thing. They're so ludicrous because number one, first of all, they're trying to make up stuff that doesn't make any sense because they're trying to give themselves an alibi or an excuse for doing something horrific, which there is no excuse for. Or secondly, because they don't understand how normal people behave and how they respond to things like this. They just kind of think, well, I'm going to tell people I'm a great gardener and look at how, good I'm doing. So I'm not a terrible person. No, you are a terrible person because that is more important to you, all of those details, than the details that you murdered 3 people. That's the thing that we can't almost get away from the sarcasm or kind of like saying, you're such an idiot. Like you almost can't. And I think it's okay to do because we're talking about their behavior doesn't match up with normal human behavior. So we can't relate to it. So we're going to say, okay, that's just weird, dude. So it's about laughing about these perpetrators and how ludicrous they are because they don't understand that that's not how humans behave and not how they should behave. Yeah, it was odd. So I really like that you put that in there. But the thing that drove me crazy in that was the entire time is he's blaming the victims. He's blaming the victims from day one. His wife, she overspent money and, I was so stressed out about money. And even the detectives and stuff, and I get it because, see, that's information they get. But the thing is, Sonya, what I love about your podcast is because you knew the family, you kind of give us a different lens of how to understand these people and what happened to them. And I understand because I've read lots of things, reports and things for detectives and police officers. And my God, they do an amazing job. And there's been some amazing investigations. They are so talented at figuring out what happened, but they don't always have the psychology down. So sometimes they'll see like the perpetrator and like the one guy said, well, I think he expressed remorse. I don't think so. I don't agree with him. I think that, like you said, he expressed the remorse that he got caught. He didn't express remorse
Yes.
about what he did to his family, about the fact that he took their lives from them and they will never, ever get to experience all the things that they should have. He just doesn't get
Absolutely.
that. Doesn't get it. I didn't even mention it, right? In the letter.
Right.
Really almost
Right.
nothing about them, except for he tried so hard and they always wanted more. And meanwhile, okay, I can see that might be a stressor, but you could get divorced, you can file bankruptcy, you can do lots of things, right? No, it's like, oh, I
Right.
snapped. And then he blames his daughter. Oh, she was smoking marijuana or rolling marijuana, whatever the heck that was about. Whether she was or not is not a reason that you would actually choke your daughter out until she died. It just isn't,
Absolutely.
any world, right?
I mean, been a single parent. Yeah.
Me too.
And it's a rocky road, but you know what? You put your big adult pants on and you deal with it.
I think he was his own worst enemy. I
yeah.
think he created a lot of his own stress because, like you said, try to live above his means, try to look like Mr. Big Shot. That was the self-serving, the self-centered, the selfish part of him that he continued to live his whole life. And he just didn't get it. So he had to blame somebody else because a person who puts themselves up on that pedestal like I am a great guy, I just made a mistake kind of thing, which is ridiculous to say in the first place, is the fact that he is never going to take real responsibility for it. He turned himself in, when he was caught. You know why a lot of these guys do that? Because they're afraid of getting killed. They're afraid of the police are going to come after me and I'm going to get shot and killed. It's always about self-preservation, always. And so, I mean, the people that have real remorse, like I said, they're not living a successful life. If they're found, these people are like on drugs, they're having a problem with alcohol, they're very bad health, they're just not thriving. So this guy definitely had that kind of personality where it was him first always. So the fact that he keeps blaming his wife that she spent all this money and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, you tell us she had a job. She was working as a salesperson, which is not an easy way to make money. You got to be customer service and you've got to really be personable and you've got to show up and do all those things. And plus she still was raising 2 daughters and doing all those things. And he wasn't working for how long?
Yeah, a few months.
And that's the other red flag. He says he couldn't find a job. He couldn't find a job, but then he goes away and he finds a job. So
right. It didn't take him long to get to Cedar City, Utah and work at a hotel and start getting the more community on his side to build this Utah land and cattle company. I mean, if you're going to reinvent somewhere, you could have reinvented in Santa Clara at that time.
Exactly. But see, that's the thing though, Sonya, this is the problem. He has already put out this persona with everybody probably in the community that he's a successful guy, that he's a talented guy, that he has blah, 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 whatever. He can't now go take a job like anywhere because then everybody's going to see that he's a fake. So what does he have to do? He has to get rid of the life he already has and go off and, like you said, reinvent himself. But he can't reinvent himself with his wife and children because they know that he's a loser. You know what I mean? So that's the family annihilator. That's why the family annihilators do what they do. Because they have to wipe out their past and start over fresh. And how do they do that when they have a family? They annihilate them. That's what they do.
Yeah, it's so sick and senseless. When I had put out that TikTok back in December, I thought that the trail ended in Utah. And that's when I started really delving into it and finding out the whole thing about the second family and then the third family. And then I kept digging because I thought, before I found out that he was ID'd from a FBI poster, I thought, where the heck now is this guy going to land? Because I wouldn't have put it past him.
Right. Yeah. No, let me ask you something. I mean, have you got to this part yet or whatever? Is why in the world did he have the motivation to take the child? Why would he do that?
Well, he stated that Arlene was not a good mother. Okay, here's a woman that he met and married who had 5 teenage kids, first of all. Mm-hmm. She couldn't have been doing too bad of a job. I just think he was just a class A-hole. Mm-hmm. I think a couple of things. He had not had a son before. He had 2 daughters. So I think he really resonated to having the son, but also he claimed that he wanted to get better acquainted with the boy. I think there was just a lot of different factors. So why he ended up just taking off with the boy was there's a lot of really bizarre things, because the daughter, Arlene's daughter, who I spoke with in great detail, she had shared with me that he did not like the sound of the baby crying. He was not hands-on. He was not a diaper changer. He was just kind of very aloof to the fact that there was a newborn in the home. And
that's the thing. I mean, I don't know enough about it, but I'll keep listening. So hopefully we'll get some more clues. But to me, it feels like if your listeners remember that he wasn't even a year old yet. This is a baby. You know how hard it is to take care of a baby. We know, Sonya, how hard it is to take care of a baby. It's a 24/7 thing. Yes. How did he think he was going to do that? I don't even think he thought that through. It was one of two things, or maybe both. The fact that he decided, again, he's going to have power over this woman to say, you can't have this kid, it's mine. And so it was like, it was basically just a power thing. It was a control thing, right? And the second thing that just kind of crossed my mind, because he is a liar and he is a con man, that this baby is a prop. That, I mean, how much easier it is to get a woman to, oh gosh, look at this poor single dad with a child, like such a young baby, and let me help him. Right?
Right. And that's what he did, was he went off, and I think he used the religion factor and driving to Biloxi. How you end up from Cedar City, Utah to Biloxi is just completely,
that's interesting.
It's not even like a similar type of town. They're entirely different religions and everything. But he lands there and uses, like you said, the baby as a prop to say, oh, we were robbed and I don't have my wallet and I don't have this and I have this small child because my wife was killed, blah, blah, blah.
Because if some single guy shows up, everybody's like, okay, well, too bad. I don't know. You're a stranger. We don't know you. But with the baby, people are much more ready to help, especially a man with an infant. Come on. So it makes me wonder if it was, again, self-serving. And he was able to, he found another wife and all of that. So I don't know. I'm really interested to know what happened between him and he decided that maybe it was just too much. He took on too much. He had, like you said, more kids and all of that. And so then he had to use, again, her fault. She was a bad mother. She was a spender. She was a bad mother. She was a marijuana smoker. This guy hates women. He hated women.
Right.
For sure.
And his thing too was, blaming her as, oh, she's not a good mother. And one of the things was that he felt that she didn't have the wherewithal to add enough discipline into the family. It really drove him crazy, because yet again, he's a control freak.
Control. Him to bring up discipline, dude. I mean, how unaware are you of yourself? You should never lay a hand on anybody or raise a voice to anybody in your life again. I mean, again, if you were very remorseful, you would stay away from kids, I think, afraid that you might flip again and do something and hurt them. I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So, pretty crazy.
Do you think that any of this was premeditated? His story about the marijuana smoking and all that?
As far as how it happened, I was pondering this yesterday. The thing that he says about he comes in and he sees her doing this thing with the marijuana, honestly, I don't believe that. What I do think is something around the marijuana, or him thinking marijuana had happened in the past. And that was already something that was in his head. And I think that something maybe happened that day. Maybe he just came home and he was just like, whatever. I don't know. I mean, did you know Paula very well? Did you know what her personality type was like? Was she very outgoing, or was she more reserved? Do you remember?
She was more reserved, more studious, very, very serious, but still had a sense of humor and laughed about things. Marianne, she was more free-spirited and more outdoorsy, and I think Paula had the wherewithal to call Pearson on his crap and basically, I'm a loser and you can't even get a job kind of thing. I think that put him over the edge.
That was the question. Do you really think that she had the personality type that she would have snapped and said something like that to her father? Because I know that what we heard was from his side of it. And we don't, of course, know her side of it. So I was just wondering, just taking contextual clues about who she was and what her personality was like. I mean, no matter what you thought of your father, even if I had a problem with my father, for me to say something like, "Oh, you're such a loser," that I couldn't do it. I was just raised to be very respectful, even if he was, which he isn't, but even if he was, you know what I mean? So do you think that there was that kind of tension in the house that she may have said something? Because I can see her saying something that he took as a criticism of him, if she was able to do that, and then him going at her. I can see that.
I think the tensions were running really high because she was accepted into a couple of universities, Santa Clara University and Berkeley. And his thing was that they didn't have the money to be able to fund college. So I've thought about it too. And I think that there's a whole concept of her being frustrated and angry at him because he had put them in that position.
Yeah. I can totally see that. So maybe something happened around the college or something, and he might have said something to her, and then she was just sick of it because it's like, well, who are you to tell me what to do? You can't even like provide or whatever. If that happened, I can see, because teenagers too, we're mouthy, right? When we're teenagers, girls, we are. I mean, boys too, but girls definitely.
Oh, me, I would have never been mouthy.
Of course not. So, but I mean, that's a normal thing in households. But again, if he was, which everything that we've seen, the way that was, he was hiding that he had financial issues or pretending he didn't or whatever it was, he had a very weak ego. So if she was, his 18-year-old daughter was to say something to him or to just like talk back to him because he said something rude or whatever, and I can see him definitely going and snapping and strangling her. But the part about the premeditated part is, that's the thing. The part about him actually thinking, okay, now I have to get rid of the rest of the family. I don't think that was on the fly. I think it may have been something, and even if it was just in the back of his mind, was in his mind because of the girl that you interviewed, which was fascinating, the one that cleaned out the house, about the true crime books, the crime mysteries that he had, like 30 of them. And all of the ways that the person got away with murder or concealed a crime were underlined. Come on. I have read hundreds of true crime books. Hundreds. I've never done that. Never done that. Never thought to do
Esther,
that.
don't you highlight all the good parts?
Well, I highlight when I'm researching, but I don't specifically look for, oh, how did they murder them? And how did they get away with it? Like, that's a completely, that is a mindset of, I may need this information in the future. That's what I think.
Right.
So, yeah, again, very interesting case, very complex perpetrator you have here. I do believe that there was premeditation. I don't think he thought he was going to do it that day. Maybe he didn't have the guts. Maybe it was something that had happened in the heat of the moment. But then he had already been thinking about this for who knows how long, 30 books at length at least. And then he said, okay, now this is what I got to do. And he set about to do it. And he knew what he was going to do. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And we got to also remember that premeditation doesn't mean that he thought about, okay, what if I'm going to now go and decide that I'm going to hurt my daughter and da-da-da-da-da. No. If you have 10 seconds before you do the thing that you think about, I'm going to choke this girl out, that's premeditation. Doesn't have to be something that you've planned extensively. It can be in the moment, but you have a chance to stop yourself. And I'll tell you why even that first one was premeditation, the first murder, because to choke somebody not only takes a lot of force, it takes a lot of time. You can't choke somebody out in 10 seconds, 5 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute. It could be 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. During any one of those seconds, he could have taken his hands off her neck. And he did it. He did it until she was dead. And so that's more than you need for premeditation, I think. Well, I'm not a lawyer. You could ask your co-host. I'm not a police officer, but just from my own research of what I've done in these kind of cases, strangulation is very difficult to do. I don't care how motivated you are. It takes a lot of force and time. So, yeah, people say, oh, yeah, it doesn't take that long. It depends, but it's not going to be 10 seconds. It's not going to be 5 seconds. You know, so that's enough to take your hands off. And he was
a big guy. He was like 6'2".
Wow.
I want to say the girls, they were roughly around 5'5", 5'6". So pretty petite gals.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
I mean, definitely,
yeah, it
it's
took a lot.
definitely, it's
It takes a
definitely
lot of
doable, but
force.
it takes time. And so, he definitely had the force in his hands to do it, but you still have to take the time. It's like I said, it's not instantaneous, so it's not like a
Right.
gun. So that you're like, oh shoot, I pulled the trigger, I was so mad. No, that's one of the most personal kinds of killings you can do is a strangulation. You're face to face with these people as you're choking the
Absolutely.
life out of them. And that is your own flesh and blood.
Right.
I just can't fathom it. It just doesn't make sense to me. Unless he was like totally psychotic, but obviously we can tell that his actions were so measured right afterwards, that he wasn't, it's like, oh, it's like psychotic in 1 second and not in the next. That doesn't, no. We've seen those in crime cases, and you never get away with trying to go for that defense. It's like, okay, that's not how it works.
Right. Yeah, and I really love that George Kennedy really nailed him on the stand. And I have said that a few times already, but I just said, yeah, Pearson met his match, and George was good calling on all of this for the prosecution, and they nailed him right in the chair there.
Yeah, and they should have, because it's a horrible case. It's a horrible thing that he did. And the fact that he went on to live this quasi-successful life with other relationships and even another child is just, that tells you everything you need to know, I think. That he was able to just
Right.
put it behind him, go on with his life. Like, okay, let me just start over. Like I said, that is the MO, like a family annihilator. And that you have to do that and then move on and just say, okay, well, that's done. And I'm going on to the next thing. It's crazy. I'm definitely going to keep listening, because there's just
Thank
all these
you.
little pieces to it. Like you said, it just continues. You think it's over, and then there's something, and then he does something else. Those are kind of things that drive me crazy too when I'm doing research. I don't know why. It's like, what? Why can't I? What year did they get married? Whatever I say.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm a stickler for certain details for whatever reason. But I just think sometimes
Yeah.
timeline, to me, everything that I do, I have to have a timeline. Because I've found, no matter, even if it's just like in my own life, if I have a timeline of when things happen, it really shows you a pattern. You start to see a story in it. And it's really interesting to me. I didn't realize that until I started doing a lot of research. And you've probably come across some of this too, like starting the timelines, and then you see something missing in the timeline. You go, wait a minute, what happened between here and here? And then you'll start digging and digging and
Yes.
digging. It's like,
Right.
yeah.
And now, I mean, I want to say that it was probably easier to find information out even up until 10 years ago, but
Mhm.
now you can't call up like a university or a school and say, hey, can you tell me what the age of this person? There's just so many privacy things, which is good.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, just trying to find about somebody who has been deceased and I've done research on where they've been buried, and that'll be up in a future episode. But
Yeah. That'll be interesting.
yeah,
Yeah. It just makes our jobs harder there when we can't get this information, right?
absolutely right. Esther, thank you again so much for being on Investigated today. It has been an honor to have you on the show and discuss this very crazy, multifaceted, abstract case. And of course, in the process, we are remembering the victims. Always love talking to you, and I would love to have you share with our listeners how they can find you, how they can listen to Once Upon a Crime.
Yeah, thank you. Oh my gosh, it's been so much fun. Yes, the easiest way is to go to my website, which is truecrimepodcast.com. That will show you how long I've been around. I got that website. truecrimepodcast.com. You can listen to episodes there. It has all the links for all of the podcatchers that you may have. So you can just click right on there and get it into whatever podcatcher that you listen to. We also have a YouTube channel, Once Upon a Crime Podcast, which is Lorena does a fabulous job of putting videos together for each episode, which I have no idea how she does that, but it's amazing. And and everything there on the website, all the events. We've got CrimeCon coming up in Nashville in May and in London in September. We at CrimeCon on Podcast Road to meet listeners, and you guys, amazing guests there. John Douglas, the FBI profiler, is going to be in Nashville. I'm so excited. He was one of my first true crime heroes.
Wow.
He's going to be there. John Ramsey, Renee Ramsey's father, is going to be at CrimeCon again. He's amazing to listen to his stories and
Wow.
things. Of
That
course.
is cool.
Yeah, it's a blast. So check out the information there on my events page and all the social media links. You can join our Facebook group or follow us on TikTok, whatever you guys do. It's all there. That's all Lorena too.
It's all there.
I just tell the stories. I don't do anything else.
Oh, but it's a well-oiled machine, I'll tell you that.
Thanks. Oh yeah, it was so fun talking to you. And oh my God, I was just so into this story that you're telling us. And I just love that you, Mark, tell it with heart. And man, amazing guests. And I want to talk to these detectives and these retired officers and these George Kennedy. And oh my God, I've known that name George Kennedy here in Santa Clara County forever. And I've never got to talk to him. And I'm just I'm so excited that you did. That's just so cool, man. So yeah, just continued success with the podcast. And it's amazing. Thanks so much for having me on.
My pleasure. It's always a treat. And maybe we'll do something together sometime soon again.
Yeah. We definitely need to. At least have drinks, something.
Drinks are good. All right, Esther. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Okay. You too. Thanks. We'll talk soon. Bye.
Bye. Mark, what do you think? Was that a great interview?
Absolutely. Like I said, you guys knocked it out of the park, and it was a lot of information that we've already heard, but from a little bit of different twist from her perspective as a podcaster. So that was very appreciated. Because, like I said before in our pre-log, I think this was a great conversation, and I think people will listen to it. It's an hour long, but they'll think it's like 15 minutes because it's so enamoring.
Yes, and Esther, she's just so great. We had a great time recording that, and there's a reason why her podcast has been so successful, and there's a reason why she has over 35 million downloads, because she is just amazing. And she is such a pro and a great storyteller. And I mean, she has been on network TV. She's been invited to all different kinds of talks and panels and things like that because she really knows her stuff. So many thanks again to Esther for being on the show today. We really enjoyed our time together. You know, Mark, there's one word that I describe as to everyone that I have interviewed, whether it has been law enforcement, witnesses, the prosecution, people like Clark and Esther, just everybody. That word is passion, and it comes through their voices, and the passion in their voice is undeniable. Nobody's making this stuff up. Everybody truly has passion about this, whether it's the loathment for Pearson or the empathy and sympathy for Marianne, Paula, and Pauline. This strikes a chord with every single person that we have talked to.
Yeah, and it's different from everybody. And like you just mentioned, how they feel, who they relate with, the closure that people may be getting who were actually involved in the case is great as well, because that's kind of an extra little benefit that we wanted in our podcast, but didn't know if we were going to get it, and we have. And so that's been amazing as well.
And even back when I had interviewed George Kennedy at the very beginning, he was very to the point, but you can tell how he had warmed up, and we had a great discussion about how he prosecuted Pearson. And I mean, Mary Winget, you can hear the passion in her voice. Everybody, and it's pretty crazy. But I think it's all in all is just helping round out the story and just really bringing in a lot of talent and professions into the mix.
Yes, for sure.
And of course, the outreach and the listenership of the podcast will hopefully bring in a lot of people that might remember them at any age.
And the other thing may be the kids were probably, once you're 8, 10, 12 years old, which is what they were when they were living in Salem, there may be people that know them from that point of view, perspective, from the kids who went to school with them, any other people that may have known them kids-wise. So that would be interesting to see if we can pick up some of that information too.
That would be awesome because, they did go to Cupertino High here locally. So even to ask questions to somebody that might have attended a class with them or someone that knew what kind of electives they took, what kind of clubs they had been participating in, something a little different or other than what we have already found in yearbooks and things like that. But it is still nice to hear from people that would have those memories and would remember them. And of course, we do not want to forget about Pauline. She was the mother. She was, as far as I'm concerned, pretty much the head of household. She had friends. She worked with people. She shopped with people. She had golfing buddies. So there's got to be some people that remember her, or, their kids who would have remembered her through the girls and that kind of thing.
For sure. Yeah, that would be nice if somebody could reach out to us for that.
So, Marek, until next week, we've got more acknowledgments, and I've got some really great stuff to share next week and as a little passion project in relation to this whole story.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time on episode 13 of Investigated.
Thanks, Marek.
Bye, Sonya.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to follow Investigated on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also visit our website at investigatedpod.com to learn more about your hosts, Sonya Paz and Marek Kaspczyk. Follow us on social media and connect with us. Investigated is written, edited, and hosted by me, Sonya Paz, with story input and advisement from Marek Kaspczyk. And many thanks to the research of criminologist Clark Williams and to Allison Betts Goldman for her contributions to this story. If you'd like to support our show, visit our website. And if you'd like to give us a 5-star review on Apple iTunes, we would always appreciate that because extra podcast love is amazing. It also helps us get more visibility from fabulous listeners like you. Thanks again, and see you next time.